now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Daniel Kawczynski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is a gas pipeline being constructed on the bottom of the Baltic Sea between Russia and Germany, bypassing all of our allies in Central and Eastern Europe, fellow NATO partners that have in the past been put under the most extraordinary pressure by the Russians over energy supplies. And that is why I am so concerned about this project for the security of NATO and our responsibilities to our allies in Central and Eastern Europe. Although it's not possible for many members of Parliament to be in the chamber this evening, we have written to the Prime Minister in the past. Over 35 Conservative members of Parliament have co-signed a letter on this issue to the Prime Minister, and there are many more in other parties who also have grave concerns about this project. I can understand that during the Brexit negotiations, and indeed when we were negotiating the trade agreement with the European Union, that this government may have expressed a certain amount of caution on this issue, taking into consideration the extraordinary power of Germany within the European Union and the extraordinary power that Germany has over the European Commission. It may not have been wise for the United Kingdom at that juncture to follow our American partners and others in agitating on this issue. Nevertheless, that time has now passed, and we are now an independent, sovereign nation state. We are also a permanent member of the UN Security Council, a privilege peculiar to only 5 countries in the world, and the 5th largest economy in the world, and arguably the strongest military power on our continent. With those extraordinary privileges and attributions for Britain comes extraordinary responsibility. And that is why I believe this government now must take a lead on our continent in having this project stopped. It's a threat to NATO security and cohesion. And now, of course, with North Macedonia joining our alliance, we have 30 members of this most successful military alliance. I think it's like being a member of a special club with a gold American Express card. This is one of the most successful military alliances in the world. But we don't have just responsibility in protecting our fellow NATO members from invasion. We also have a duty of care and the letter and spirit of our obligations under NATO to ensure that our NATO partners in Central and Eastern Europe are not blackmailed and intimidated by the Russians over energy supplies. The Americans understand this. They understand the great threat to NATO, but also to the continent of Europe for allowing this project to come to its fruition. It is very close to completion, but it still can be stopped. And former President Trump, I know there are many here who don't particularly respect President Trump, but he said the wisest thing that I've heard so far when he sat at a table with the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, and he said to them over the table, "You expect us to send troops to Poland and the Baltic states and to protect you. You expect us to spend hundreds of billions of pounds every decade in protecting your continent. And yet you, the Secretary General of NATO, are allowing one NATO partner, namely Germany, to, for its own reasons, create this direct link with Russia, giving the Russians an umbilical cord for the export of their gas. We've all heard about the terrible trouble the Russian economy is in already. This is an umbilical cord from the heart of Europe to Russia, giving them the extraordinary opportunity not only of exporting to Europe, but also putting our NATO allies under threat. I'll just make a couple of extra points and then I'll give way. But following President Trump, we now have President Biden. And he has appointed as his Deputy Secretary of State, one of the most powerful positions in Washington, a lady called Wendy Sherman. And in the Senate nomination hearings, when she was being assessed by the other senators, she said this, and I quote, "We will do whatever is lawful to stop this pipeline." I will repeat that. We will do whatever is lawful to stop this pipeline. They are our closest security and military partners. And as a fellow permanent member of the UN Security Council, if they are prepared to take the lead on our continent on this hugely strategically important issue, then we must also join them. And I have written to Senator Ted Cruz this week, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, who is the leading proponent of stopping this project in the American Senate, and he and 40 other Republican senators have written to the President calling for the Americans to implement sanctions against any company and any individual involved in this project. The chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate, Bob Menendez, a Democrat, has also spoken against this project. And I just want to say one thing before I take interventions. As an independent sovereign nation, with an ability to influence our continent now in an unprecedented way, unfettered by the communal constraints of the European Union, if we now join the Americans as two permanent members of the UN Security Council, I think we could possibly stop this project. So many companies involved in the construction of this pipeline, whether they are Swiss companies or others, are so frightened of the prospects of sanctions against them that they are likely to pull out of the project, and this project will be stopped. So Britain is at the forefront in this seesaw between Germany and Russia and many of our NATO partners in Central and Eastern Europe and the Americans. It will be Britain that ultimately decides which side of this extraordinary debate wins out and guarantees the security of our NATO partners. I give way to the honourable gentleman, and then I'll give way to the honourable gentleman from the Labour Party.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. First of all, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman for Shrewsbury and Action for bringing this forward. This is a place for these decisions and to be debated and to be brought forward. The foreign policy issues surrounding Nord Stream are deep and complex, as the honourable gentleman has referred to. I fully agree that we must be wary of reliance on unreliable states. Does the honourable member not agree that the recent reports of state-sponsored attacks on protesters in Russia is a sobering reminder, if one is needed, that there is more of a cost to be paid to be enthralled to Russia other than money?
I couldn't agree more with the honourable gentleman, and I will come on to talking about some of the extraordinary behaviour of Russia in its own neighbourhood, but also domestically within its own jurisdiction, and the way in which it is undermining and subverting a democracy in its own country. When I was on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, I called for dialogue with the Russians. I still stand by that. I think we have to talk to these people, but we have to talk to them from a position of strength, and giving them this umbilical cord to the heart of Europe undermines that negotiating people. One thing we know about the Russians, and it's Reagan and Thatcher who taught us, Thatcher inviting Gorbachev in December of 1984 to Chequers, the first Western leader to invite Gorbachev for discussions. They have taught us you can only negotiate with these people from a position of strength. Divided amongst ourselves, they will eat us for breakfast. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I agree with every word that he's said in the debate today, and I congratulate him on securing this evening. I think it's a geostrategic mistake for Germany to be encouraging this. I think we need to get the French on board to try and make sure that if we've got 3 out of 5 of the Security Council members, then I think that's an even stronger position. And I am anxious that the UK government does seem to be going a bit quiet on this issue, as for that matter it has done on the imprisonment of Alexei Navalny, which to me is yet another flagrant abuse of human rights in Russia.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for that intervention, and I agree with every word that he has said. And I will come on later on in my speech to actually chiding my own government. They have been almost mute on this issue, and that position does not reflect the urgency of the situation and the responsibility that our country has. Countries in Central and Eastern Europe are not just leaving this all to us to deal with. They have created something called the 3 Cs Initiative. 12 countries, all of whom are members of the European Union and all of whom are members of NATO, apart from Austria, a regional, relatively homogenous bloc, the 3 Cs Initiative. And the 12 members of these countries, they're on the front line with Russia. My office and I have spent the last few weeks interviewing all the ambassadors from these 12 countries. We've interviewed 10 out of 12, and we're going to be, so far, and we're going to be writing a report for members of Parliament about the 3 Cs Initiative. These countries themselves are trying to create strategic investments across the whole of the bloc to safeguard individual members against undue Russian pressure.
My honourable friend give way.
I will give it way, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The strategic problem is this, is it not? That by putting this Nord Stream 2 pipeline straight into Germany, Germany can guarantee its gas supplies from Russia. On the other hand, these countries in Eastern Europe, the Cs, as it were, they could be blackmailed by Russia and they could be picked off from the rest of NATO. And that is the strategic problem with Nord Stream 2.
Well, may I just say that my honourable friend, who is such an excellent speaker with so much experience in military matters, has managed to, in a few words, put the whole situation more succinctly than I could in half an hour. So I'm very grateful to him. Poland and Croatia have been the instigators of the 3 Cs Initiative. Both countries have built liquefied gas terminals on their coastlines. And the whole thing about the 3 Cs Initiative is that the investments seek to then create additional pipelines so that more of this liquefied gas can be sent inland to landlocked neighbours and NATO partners. Poland is also buying a huge amount of liquefied gas from America and from Norway, and has invested billions of dollars in its liquefied gas terminal at Świnoujście on the Baltic coast. I'd like to see Hansard deal with the spelling of that. I'll help them with the spelling of Świnoujście. But isn't that an amazing example, Mr. Deputy Speaker? If you are a member of NATO, this exclusive club, an organisation that hasn't lost a square inch of territory since its inception 70 years ago, surely there should be the next step is, like Poland is doing, buying gas, even if it costs a little bit more, from America and Norway, so that it is not dependent on Russian gas supplies. And I would like the Minister to give me an assurance that the Foreign Office is working hand in glove with the Department of Trade and Industry to assess what are the opportunities for British companies to participate in the construction of these pipelines within the 3 Cs jurisdiction, and to help and assist and to invest in these liquefied gas terminals on the coastlines in the Adriatic Sea, the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, so that we have some of the greatest energy companies in the world, and from a strategic and financial interest it's important for Britain, but also in helping our fellow NATO partners in Central and Eastern Europe. I give way to the Chairman of the Security and Intelligence Select Committee.
I wonder what reasons Germany has given, at least publicly, for its behaviour, given the overwhelming case against Nord Stream 2 outlined by my honourable friend, and I can't help being put in mind of that famous quotation, which may or may not have correctly been attributed to Lenin, that the West and the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them.
I couldn't have put the situation better. And of course, Germany, in a rather peculiar statement the other day, they haven't really explained why they are building this. Clearly, it's a stitch-up between the Russians and the Germans. They don't want to rely on the transportation of gas through Belarus or Ukraine or Poland, countries that the Russians have problems with. They don't want to rely on exporting their main commodity through these countries. They want to have a direct link under the sea so that Germany, irrespective of their obligations to NATO, can have that direct access to Russian gas. It's a very selfish, I won't give way to say, it's a very selfish act on their part and inconsistent with NATO membership. The Germans have always also said that it's something to do with their obligations to Russia in terms of war reparations from the Second World War. And they need to help the Russians in the construction of this pipeline out of some sense of duty to support the Russians over war reparations. Well, if that is the case,
What about Poland?
Poland are still waiting for their war reparations 80 years on.
And France.
We need a... But this, I'm very grateful, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the last few minutes, I'm very grateful for this Adjournment Debate, but it shouldn't be for a backbench Tory MP like me to raise this issue. It should be the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary going out there explaining the threat of this project to our electorate. I would suspect if most of us go back to our constituencies and start to talk about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, not everybody will be cognizant about this project. It should be the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary who are leading the way in explaining to our citizens the threat this project poses to our allies and ultimately to us. Because one thing we have learned from history, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if there is instability in Central and Eastern Europe, if these countries are threatened, blackmailed, invaded, who is it who always gets sucked into it? It's the United Kingdom. And we have seen too much instability on our continent to allow Britain to be sucked into that. So we need a statement from the British government that we're going to implement sanctions on every company and individual involved in this project. And it must start with a former German Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, who was earning an eye-watering salary at the very pinnacle of this organisation. Gazprom, as my honourable friend says. Germany are behaving in a selfish, to answer my friend, selfish and dangerous way, and in a way which is incompatible with her responsibilities to NATO. And as I've also said, let's talk to the Russians, but let's do it from a position of strength. Now, finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have all seen, and the honourable member from the opposition side has been one of the most vocal proponents of the outrageous behaviour of the Russians within our neighbourhood, whether it's in Georgia, South Ossetia, the butchery that took place there, in Ukraine, but also in the ongoing deliberate violation of the Baltic states' maritime and airspace. I went to Ukraine when I was on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and we went to Donetsk and Lugansk in eastern Ukraine. I've never seen anything like it in my 15 years as a Member of Parliament. It was like being on the face of the moon. Everything was destroyed. Nothing was left standing. It was a wasteland. So we saw on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee what the Russians are capable of in Ukraine. And the two countries that this will violate the most, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are indeed Ukraine and Belarus. The government is trumpeting its agreement with the Ukrainians here on the government website just this month. The government has signed, the UK and Ukraine signed a political, free trade and a strategic partnership with Ukraine, a strategic partnership with Ukraine. Here we have the Prime Minister with the President of Ukraine signing this, and it says UK cooperation in political, security and foreign matters with Ukraine. How can we sign a strategic partnership with Ukrainians whilst at the same time kicking the chair from underneath them, and the last one power that they have over the Russians, the fact that they have to export their gas from Ukraine, we allow that not to happen? This agreement isn't going to be worth the paper it's written on if this project is allowed to come to conclusion.
On that point.
In a second. And finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Belarus. We have all seen on our television screens the brave young men and women fighting against this brutal dictator in Minsk. And I went on the parliamentary delegation a few years ago to Minsk, and I saw at first hand how this authoritarian, brutal regime suppresses its own people. But one day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Lukashenko will be gone. And this will be a new, independent, sovereign, fledgling state. Can you imagine in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, whenever it is, when the democratic government of Belarus is seeking to finally join the rest of Europe as a sovereign state? Can you imagine what position they will be in if this gas doesn't have to go through their country and just go straight to Germany under the sea? It will be the greatest impediment to the democratization of Belarus. And we have a duty and a responsibility to that country as a fellow European partner. Now, I must conclude by allowing this pipeline, we not only betray our NATO allies, but we empower Russia in an unprecedented way to manipulate Belarus and Ukraine. I look forward to the Minister's response to those genuine fears that I have and the fears of many, many colleagues from across the House.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Shrewsbury and Atcham, for securing this debate, but also for his ongoing work on European energy security, including as chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Poland. I'm also grateful for the contributions to this debate that he and other honourable members have made this evening, and I will try in the time that I have to respond to all of the points that were raised. The resumption of construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline after a one-year hiatus has understandably rekindled interest in this project. As many honourable members are aware, the UK government has repeatedly aired our significant concerns about Nord Stream 2, about its implications for European energy security and about its impact on Ukraine and other transit countries. When complete, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Nord Stream 2 would double the Russian gas capacity flowing directly into Germany, which, alongside the southern Turk Stream route, would largely replace the need for Russian gas to transit Ukraine. This government's concerns about this pipeline are a matter of public record, and we continue to raise them publicly and in private with key allies. It is important to reiterate that Nord Stream 2 would not affect UK gas supply. The UK gas market is one of the most liquid and developed in the world, and our gas comes from diverse and reliable sources. Most of the gas we use comes from our own production and from reliable suppliers such as Norway. While we receive a small amount of liquefied natural gas from Russia, last year it accounted for less than 3% of our total gas supply. So, although Nord Stream 2 would not directly impact on our energy security, it could have serious implications for Central and Eastern European countries. Last year, around one-third of European gas came via Russian gas pipelines. Some European countries are nearly wholly dependent on Russian gas. This reliance on a single source raises serious concerns about energy security. Furthermore, we do not believe that Nord Stream 2 is necessary to meet future European gas demand. There is sufficient existing pipeline infrastructure including through Ukraine and Poland, for Russia to meet its European supply commitments. There are also big questions around the need for Nord Stream 2 in a decarbonised future. While the UK and European countries will continue to raise natural gas for years to come, to need natural gas for years to come, we are increasingly using energy from renewable sources, and we need to work to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from the entire energy system in order to meet our net zero targets. As I've said, the potential impact of Nord Stream 2 on Ukraine is particularly worrying. Ukraine hosts the largest existing pipeline network for Russian gas, and transit fees have historically made up a significant proportion of their GDP. Nord Stream 2 would divert supplies away from Ukraine with significant consequences for their economy. It could also have significant security implications. The transit of Russian gas through Ukraine is regarded as a deterrent against further Russian aggression. It is therefore a vital part of Ukraine's national security. I'm going to continue, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I'm just conscious I don't have much time, but if I have at the end, I'll come back. It is positive that Naftogaz and Gazprom signed a gas transit agreement at the end of 2019, which helped avoid disruption at the time, and we welcome the role that Germany and the EU played in facilitating those negotiations. However, that agreement only provides certainty through to 2024. After that point, there is greater uncertainty. I would like to reiterate the UK government's long-standing and unwavering commitment to Ukraine. We are one of their strongest supporters, and we are providing political and practical support to strengthen Ukraine's sovereignty and resilience. On energy specifically, we're helping Ukraine to reform its energy market, working closely with the Ministry for Energy and the Ukrainian regulator. I know there are some who ask whether there is more the UK could be doing to oppose Nord Stream 2. And my honourable friend has put forward some interesting proposals. The UK welcomes the efforts of the 3Cs initiative to promote cooperation and development across Central and Eastern Europe, and we're open to the possibility of expanding the UK's interaction with that group. I can reassure my honourable members that we will continue to share our concerns about Nord Stream 2 with key partners. It is our strong belief that we should be working to reduce reliance on any single gas supplier and the dependency and leverage that can come with it. To counteract the risks associated with Nord Stream 2, it is essential that European countries diversify their energy supplies. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was glad to visit Poland in October last year to discuss the need for energy transformation and a just transition, including with a business audience at the Wrocław Energy Congress. Since that time, Poland has proposed an ambitious energy plan and agreed on the EU's target of at least 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. We will continue to work with them to achieve ambitious climate and energy goals. However, with respect to Nord Stream 2, it is also important to recognise Germany's sovereign right to formulate its own energy policy. Nord Stream 2 is highly contentious, but we would not want the debate over it to risk undermining the coordinated response by allies to wider Russian malign activity. Let me conclude by fully recognising the legitimate concerns that honourable members have raised today. Nord Stream 2 poses a threat to European energy security and the interests of existing transit countries. At a time when Europe should be diversifying and decarbonising its energy supplies, Nord Stream 2 risks entrenching European dependency on Russian gas for decades to come. It would increase Russia's ability to use energy as a political tool. For these reasons, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the UK remains opposed to the pipeline, and we will continue to raise our concerns with key partners. We will also continue to support initiatives that strengthen and diversify the European energy market.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as that have been say aye. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.